poem for liberty, harmony, and humanity. League of the open-eyed, minded, hearted. It began on a quiet night, dreaming with stars. A confederation of caring, of the awake and awakening, that has no offices or officers, bylaws or secret handshakes, exists, invites, everywhere, extends without bounds to every corner of the planet, every man-made dwelling, every city to every town, village, outpost, hamlet, is a league for you, your neighbors, friends, family, for anyone willing to open their heart, mind, and eyes to the light and height of their humanity, to the right to live free, be at truer liberty, to the gift of being here, in peace, in harmony. The wider we open them, each and all, the stronger such a league grows, the more our hope flows, fear recedes, the better the nature of our days, and the future of our one shared world becomes. Are you ready to open, to belong? Welcome, and thank you for leaning in to this floating poetry broadcast, the 39th in my ongoing weekly series, coming to you live from the sea-gulled coast of New England, from Watch Hill, Rhode Island. This is your poet and poetorialist, Colin Goedecke, a voice for living our days more poetically, more expressively, more soulfully, inviting each of you this week to look at becoming or being even more open-eyed, open-minded, open-hearted. And with that opening, openness, awakening, such clearness can yield within yourself, between you and others, and for the larger world, especially at a time, a wildly challenging time, deeply troubling time for most, literally, emotionally, and otherwise, that has often caused the closing of eyes, minds, and hearts, when such openness and all the vital hope, the desired freedom and harmony and greater humanity that can flow from it across the board is so wanted, is so needed now and more than ever by so many people everywhere in the world, by our fellow earth mates and the beautiful, vulnerable natural world. So there are some wise lenses and senses of others that I've chosen of note to me that I felt well worth curating and sharing with you this week, from bigger picture commentary to expressions of rising possibility and a quiver of heartful, soulful poetry of fitting kinds, including some of my own, one poet among others, present and past, calling us to all kinds of awakenings, feelings, and worthwhile wonderings. So, as I brought forth in the opening poem, at what may be one of the biggest tipping points for us, pivot points for us, ripest opportunities for us, not just as a country of people, whatever country you're from, but as a people of the world, to make a conscious choice to live at liberty and harmony and with truer humanity, or our truest humanity, to come awake, be and stay awake, greatly awake and clearly attuned to what matters on the most fundamental levels, to see, think, and feel about how we really want to be and how we want to live as a whole community going forward, and how we don't, to take responsibility ourselves, individually, person by person, conversation by conversation, and contemplation by contemplation, for the future, for our future, something we're all in together, could all unite toward as beings beyond flags and fixations. And for me, by uniting, open eye to open eye, open mind to open mind, open heart to open heart, make a remarkable difference, move together toward a truly caring society, toward a genuinely healthy environment that serves everyone's well-being. A world I believe we'd all be glad and grateful to live and love and thrive in, beyond where we are today. Well, all these are things at the forefront of my consciousness and my own ongoing questionings and seekings, bringing you into those and fountainings of thought and art. So let there be openings. And let's start here with some notable poets and writers and what they've offered up to us. One is E.B. White, and he did an interview back in 1969 with George Plimpton, and he said, "A writer should concern himself with whatever absorbs his fancy, stirs his heart, and unlimbers his typewriter. I feel no obligation to deal with politics. I do feel a responsibility to society because of going into print. A writer has the duty to be good, not lousy, true, not false, lively, not dull, accurate, not full of error. He should tend to lift people up, not lower them down. Writers do not merely reflect and interpret life, they inform and shape life. As a writing man, I've always felt charged with the safekeeping of all unexpected items of worldly or unworldly enchantment, as though I might be held personally responsible if even a small one were to be lost. A writer must reflect and interpret his society, his world. He must also provide inspiration and guidance and challenge." Thank you, E.B. White. Muriel Rukeyser, in her book, The Life of Poetry, this is 1949. That was 69 that interview was done. This was 1949, 20 years prior to that. She wrote in the foreword of that book, "The way to allow people to feel the meeting of their consciousness and the world, to feel the full value of the meanings of emotions and ideas in their relations with each other, and to understand in the glimpse of a moment the freshness of things and their possibilities. There is an art which gives us that way, and it is, in our society, an outcast art." Well, of course, she's talking about poetry. "A poem is not its words or its images any more than a symphony is its notes or a river its drops of water. Poetry depends on the moving relations within itself. It is an art that lives in time, expressing and evoking the moving relation between individual consciousness and the world. The work that a poem does is a transfer of human energy, and I think human energy may be defined as consciousness, the capacity to make change in existing conditions. Poetry is, above all, an approach to the truth of feeling. And what is the use of truth? However confused the scene of our life appears, however torn we may be, who now do face that scene, it can be faced, and we can go on to be whole." Hear, hear. Thank you, Muriel Rukeyser. Well, our once upon a time amazing, to me, president, the more I've learned about him over time and recent time too, John F. Kennedy, he had this to say in his eulogy for his friend, the poet Robert Frost. "If art is to nourish the roots of our culture, society must set the artist free to follow his vision wherever it takes him. We must never forget that art is not a form of propaganda, it is a form of truth. In free society, art is not a weapon, and it does not belong to the spheres of polemic and ideology. Artists are not engineers of the soul. It may be different elsewhere, but democratic society, in it, the highest duty of the writer, the composer, the artist, is to remain true to himself and to let the chips fall where they may in serving his vision of the truth. The artist best serves his nation." So that led me to remember an interview that Mark Strand, former poet laureate, Pulitzer Prize winner for his collection, which is a wonderful collection, Blizzard of One. I think it was his very last one. Not with us anymore on the planet, but very much in the molecules. And this was a 1998 interview, also in the Paris Review. And he saw poetry as a humanizing influence in an increasingly inhumane world, and said, if every head of state and every government official spent an hour a day reading poetry, we'd live in a much more humane and decent world. Poetry delivers an inner life that is articulated to the reader. People have inner lives, but they are poorly expressed and rarely known. They have no language by which to bring it out into the open. Two people deeply in love can look at each other and not have much to say except, I love you. It gets kind of boring after a while, after the first 10 or 20 years. When we read poems from the past, we realize that human beings have always been the way we are. We have technological advancements undreamt of a couple thousand years ago, but the way people felt then is pretty much the way people feel now. We can read those poems with pleasure because we recognize ourselves in them. Poetry helps us imagine what it's like to be human. I wish more politicians and heads of state would begin to imagine what it's like to be human. Thank you, Mark Strand. This brought me to recall and call up this poem of mine. Mind the minefield is what a mind field can become when left unswept, unminded. A field of concealed charges one fails or refuses to see and remove or steer clear of. So step on, detonate, and explode from, be blasted, crippled by, awfully, over and over. And because I feel asking essential questions, as I've done on various programs and in conversations with friends and to myself, of all kinds, it's so necessary, for me anyway, all the time, to help gain greater understanding of whatever and grounding. This was a poem, although I'd written it to my goddaughter on her 20th birthday, it really applies to, I'd say, everybody, more or less. 20 questions to ask yourself. In the still of the night, whether bright-starred or half-mooned, in the midst of the day, as you go about your living and learning, when rising freshly to the morning, to the unfolding of more curiosity, possibility, surprise, the number of them doesn't matter, nor time nor place, only how heartful, how truthful you are asking, how meaningful the answering. Questions that here and there want to be posed, mused on, even if there are no clear or ready answers to be found or heard. Questions only you, with all innocence, can ask, must ask, without pause, of your deep knowing self. Sip of water. Well, the resonant writer and liver of life, Anais Nin, wrote, she was 28 years back in 19 years old when she wrote this, a generation after Kafka wrote to his best friend that, quote, a book must be the axe for the frozen sea inside us. How dramatic is that? And she wrote, you live like this, sheltered in a delicate world, and you believe you are living. Then you read a book, Lady Chatterley, for instance, or you take a trip, or you talk with someone, and you discover that you are not living, that you are hibernating. The symptoms of hibernating are easily detectable. First, restlessness. The second symptom, when hibernating becomes dangerous and might degenerate into death, absence of pleasure. That is all. It appears like an innocuous illness. Monotony, boredom, death. Millions live like this or die like this without knowing it. They work in offices, they drive a car, they picnic with their families, they raise children, and then some shock treatment takes place, a person, a book, a song, and it awakens them and saves them. Thought that was quite something. Thanks to her for that. So, in the midst of all of these interior musings, we also have concerns, and we have for a long time, but maybe even more now, and despairs and angst about not only life, but about life of the natural world, of the environment, and its many continued degradations, which I'm sure most of us know all about, beyond whatever we don't know. We know enough to be rightly concerned. And there was a recent interview with the poet farmer and conservationist Wendell Berry. If you don't know his work, his poetry is really marvelous, coming from all those sensibilities, those different sensibilities. And I thought a few slices of this very recent interview he did were worthwhile. So he says, in answer to different questions, but in this question, he says, but if the love of your country doesn't move you to do something to take care of it, no matter how small or unnewsworthy, then I don't think you have any protection against despair. It bothers me to hear the politicians invoking fear, even the people on one side or the other. I don't think this recourse to fear is going to amount to anything. I trust instead people like the great Kentucky farmer Henry Basudin, who said, quote, if a man loves his soil, he'll save it. Isn't that marvelous? If a man loves his soil, he'll save it. So I'm going to go to some more things that he said in the interview. I just wanted to say for myself that I see often too much confusing and conflating of what I call the country with the government. To me, they're completely different things. They're interrelated, but to me, the country is not the government. So when I say country, I mean the land and the people. So he says to this interviewer is quite strident about, okay, your argument for despair is impenetrable, invulnerable, but we're still just sitting here with our hands hanging down, not doing anything. One of the characteristics of the machine civilization is determinism. You'll find plenty of people who will tell you there's nothing you can do. It's inevitable. You can't make an organization to refute it. You've got to do it yourself. You've got to cleanse that mess out of your heart. Among our own people, the only communities who've done that have been the Amish. Their communities have survived. We were living very much like them when I was a boy here, doing our field work with horses and mules. David Klein just published a book called The Round of a Country, Year. One of the remarkable things is that it's a happy book. David's family, his neighbors, they're cooperating all the time, and nobody's overworked. Somebody will start a task. Somebody will come to relieve that person. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, somebody comes with a fresh team of horses and finishes the work. It was the Shakers who were sure the end could come any time, and they still saved the seeds and figured out how to make better diets for old people. Thomas Merton was interested in the Shakers. I said to him, if they were certain that the world could end at any minute, how come they built the best building in Kentucky? You don't understand, said Merton. If you know the world could end at any minute, you know there's no need to hurry. You take your time and do the best work you possibly can. That was important to me. I've repeated it many times. I had a neighbor here, a happy man, a very good man, who said something to me that I lined out as a poem. It is a poem. Something better, something better. Everybody's talking about something better. The important thing is to feel good and be proud of what you got. Don't matter if it ain't nothing but a log pen. Well, that's my argument, he says, in favor of this world, against the determinists. I depend on what I know of human goodness, but also on the flowers and the butterflies and the birds, the otters and the swallows. A lot of their life is just spent having a hell of a good time. The animals, so far as I can understand them, have a great deal to say in favor of life. It's a good world still. Thank you, Wendell Berry. Well, I felt a natural dovetail here might be David Abram. If you don't know him, he's an American ecologist and philosopher best known for his work bridging the philosophical tradition of phenomenology with environmental and ecological issues. The book that I know about is The Spell of the Sensuous. Absolutely superb read, if you ever want to dip into it. Well, I have some snippets from a recent interview where he spoke of where we are. But as this pandemic swells and breaks like a colossal tsunami across the land, it strips away the flimsy facades, exposing all the god-awful structural violence of this winner-take-all society, leaving most of us feeling astonished and ashamed that we could have allowed such hideous disparities to grow and grow without struggling steadily to rectify them. Much that influences the future shape of our societies will ride on how we emerge from this crisis, how we transition out of the strangely suspended dreamscape we suddenly find ourselves adrift in. Governments and their agencies will play their roles as best they can. but the textures and tastes that eventually come to predominate, the rhythms of community in our bioregion, the generosity and convivial ethos, will, to a large extent, be determined by the choices each of us makes in this cocoon-like, shape-shifting moment. The future will be sculpted, that is, by the elemental friendships and alliances that we choose to sustain us, by our full-bodied capacity for earthly compassion and dark wonder, by our ability to listen, attentive and at ease, within the forest of our unknowing. Thank you, David Abram. All right, moment for a sip. Well, around this view, I but a pause to breathe, take a breath slowly, and take a moment to ease and feel. Feel the earth. Slow down, all the way down. Feel the earth, the sentient earth. See and touch it. Hear it. Taste it. Where you are, wherever you are. Let it hold you. Let it feel you. Let it breathe you. Let it fill you. Feel the earth. Well, near the end of the first night of this new year, I had a communing with the elements. There was an incredible rain. And this poem arose, as I did, to write it down that night before the stroke of midnight. And it's called A First Rain for a New Year. A first rain pours down clear and cold through the last hours of the first day of this new year. All the unclouded rainwater cleansing everything it reaches, blessing like a sacramental rain wine everything it touches, washing away old hurts and faults, griefs, regrets, purifying time and place, making way for life, this precious life, to begin afresh. I spoke in the last broadcast about the animals of the wild as teachers, and also on day one of this 2021 came this poem too, earlier, about getting more viscerally in touch with that aspect. I felt into that very, very distinctly. And this poem is called Sensing. I'm thinking this first day of a new year, after an earth-shaking last, of animals in the wild, how they sense danger especially, and so keenly, so instinctively, have a whole awareness always of the visible and invisible, one their survival and survival of their young hinges on. And if we, animals too, if we have lost or disconnected our early warning radar, that sixth sense our early ancestors and, quote, primitive tribal people in the bush, jungle, forest, kush also had, and honed, depended on, attuned as they were to all the life or death sensations, signals, and vibrations of their environment. I'm picturing the deer in the winter woods, whose large ears prick up, cup, and pivot to listen and assess the existence or imminence of a threat. The careful bird that takes knowing flight. Or those fellow creatures feeling far into the ground, using the sensors in their skin, their Pacinian corpuscles, from elephants in their feet to bobcats in their guts, enabling them to feel earthquakes, tsunamis, eruptions long before they arrive and move to safety. Sensors we possess, but now rarely practice using. Out of touch as many, far too many, are with nature, outer and their inner. But all this dormant circuitry, maybe today more than ever, no, definitely today, we men, women, humans need to awaken, activate, to feel, hear, taste, smell, if, how, where we're at peril, amongst predators, keep us out of a or any great unseen jeopardy, while there's chance. Now I'm no longer thinking, only cocking my ears, sharpening my sight, sniffing the surrounding air, feeling what's telling in my gut, and subtly telegraphing below my open soles, sensing like an earth-wise animal. Well, two fitting statements, thought points, rallying points of a kind. One is Michael Mead. I've referenced him a few times before in other ways. Storyteller and, quote, applied mythologist. He calls himself as an applied mythologist. And he's the founder of Mosaic Voices. A wonderful figure. He says this: in these dark and uncertain times, there can be great value in imagining a bit of star in each human soul. Not just that it gives some hope for humanity at a time when man's inhumanity to man seems ever on the increase, but also because it points to an inner brightness that can light the way in dark times. It's quite beautiful and poignant, and to be a light bearer and bring our light to bear in the world, to each other. And Gene Houston, founder of the Mystery School, a thought leader, human potential movement thought leader. We have come to the stage where the real work of humanity begins, the time where we partner in the regenesis of society and assuming a new type of culture, the culture of kindness. Kindness is king. That's part of one of my mottos or mantras. Kindness is king. So, around the fallings out some of us are experiencing or seeing or hearing about them, which are heart-aching, between people, some cases friends, and certain cases families, I had written a poem some years back for someone in particular, but I feel it's something we actually can all offer each other. It's called The Branch and the Bridge. I hold out an olive branch, invoking peace, a new green leaf, inviting possibility, a heart of empathy, humility, and a spirit of affinity, infinity. With these offerings, more understandings. Above all, I hold out a hand of friendship, soulship, and harmony, and a hope for a bridge we can arch across together. I appreciated what Dylan Charles recently wrote. He is the editor of Waking Times, speaking of waking and awakening, with an eye to help us navigate these strange times. One thing he said was, those who learn to stay continually aligned with their inner truth will be able to avoid slipping into conformity, dependence, fear, groupthink, and herd stupidity. One of the things I'm noticing very clearly these days is how the nature of truth and the source of truth is changing. Whereas once we could seek and find it in our established collective history, media, and in the accounts of others, it's now being revealed to us in relationships. All of that other stuff is proving to be completely compromised. And the isolation of the year has induced a purification in our relationships, so that now it's as though we're all operating in a house of mirrors. At first, the crisis revealed our truest colors to those closest to us, and now in the reflections of our relationships, we can see more clearly than ever what we need to know and do in order to evolve and grow into this new inner freedom. If we ignore what we see, we'll get stuck in the old ways of being. So I ask, he says, how did you do when the pandemic came down? Did you panic? Did you freeze? How far into your mind did the fear get? Did you let it work its way into your heart? Did you lose any part of your humanity? Or maybe your true colors are beautiful. Did you discover new depths to your compassion in all of this? Did you find solace in generosity and empathy? Did you turn to acts of service to reassure your soul? Did your heart open up wide, bright, and true? Pay careful attention to how you're showing up in your relationships these days, because there are two competing narratives playing out in our world right now. One of them happens on the media stage and features an expertly crafted orchestration of humanity's worst qualities. The other story happens in your mind and in your heart and presents an extraordinary opportunity for personal evolution. Whichever one you're focused on is what you'll bring to the others in your life and will determine what feedback you receive from them in the world. A wise friend recently told me that the love we experience in our lives is the clearest reflection of who we truly are as people. Well, speaking of narratives, I was thinking about, there was a recent Richard Rohr, R-O-H-R, meditation he's got daily meditations out from the Center for Action and Contemplation. And he speaks about stories were stories, how essential they are. And I was thinking about, hold on a moment. Thursday tonight. So much of what we're immersed in now and have been across history are stories, ones we're told and ones we tell ourselves. And so he says to us, yes, they're essential. It doesn't matter how old we are. We all need them to believe in. If there's no storyline, no integrating images that define who we are or that give our lives meaning or direction, we just won't be happy. It was probably Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell who most developed this idea for my generation of Western rationalists. Many of us thought that myth meant, quote, not true, when in fact the older meaning of myth is precisely, quote, always true. Jungian analyst and storyteller Clarissa Pinkola Estes writes, stories set the inner life into motion, and this is particularly important where the inner life is frightened, wedged, or cornered. Story greases the hoists and pulleys. It causes adrenaline to surge, shows us the way out, down, or up, and for our trouble, cuts for us fine, wide doors in previously blank walls, openings that lead to the dreamland, that lead to love and learning, that lead us back to our own real lives. I can't imagine I'm alone, says Rohr, in longing for us collectively to embrace a better story, one that has the power to change our hearts and minds and enliven our imaginations. Jung goes so far as to say that transformation only happens in the presence of story, myth, and image, not primarily through rational arguments. So what fits or does not fit into your pre-existing storyline? He had a follow-on piece with a colleague who was a teacher talking about paradigms and talking about his version of that, which is framing stories. And he says our growing list of global crises way before the pandemic, together with our inability to address them, gives us strong evidence that our world's dominant framing story is failing. And he says, but if a new framing story were to tell us that we're free and responsible creatures, able to pursue virtue, collaboration, peace, and mutual care for one another and all living creatures, and that our lives can have profound meaning, that wisdom, then our society will take a radically different direction, and our world will become a very different place. Well, I'm sure a lot of you are doing your part. I am too, and part of that is just getting to an understanding of where we could go and then figure out how to go there. Well, Walter Lippmann came to mind, a significant writer, media theorist, political critic, whose moral courage of shedding light on the pitfalls of society and the human psyche Eleanor Roosevelt admired. Teddy Roosevelt considered him one of the most brilliant young men of his age. And this is back in 1922. He could say this today if he was alive and here. Looking back, we can see how indirectly we know the environment in which nevertheless we live. We can see that the news of it comes to us now fast, now slowly, but that whatever we believe to be a true picture, we treat it as if it were the environment itself. It's harder to remember that about the beliefs upon which we're now acting, but in respect to other peoples in other ages, we flatter ourselves that it's easy to see when they were in deadly earnest about ludicrous pictures of the world. We insist, because of our superior hindsight, that the world as they needed to know it and the world as they did know it were often two quite contradictory things. We can see, too, that while they governed and fought, traded and reformed in the world as they imagined it to be, they produced results or failed to produce any in the world as it was. They started for the Indies and found America. They diagnosed evil and hanged old women. They thought they could grow rich by always selling and never buying. A caliph, obeying what he conceived to be the will of Allah, burned the library, the great library at Alexandria. Walter Lippmann. And then Albert Camus. I can say, and in a moment I shall say, that what counts is to be human and simple. No, what counts is to be true, and then everything fits in, humanity and simplicity. When I am truer, then when am I truer than when I am in the world? My cup brims over before I have time to desire. Eternity is there, and I was hoping for it. What I wish for now is no longer happiness, but simply awareness. The great courage is still to gaze as squarely at the light as at death. Besides, how can I define the link that leads from this all-consuming love of life to this secret despair? If I listen to the voice of irony, crouching underneath things, slowly it reveals itself. Winking its small, clear eye, it says, quote, live as if. In spite of much searching, this is all I know. Well, a little back in time, as technology seemed to keep subsuming us, I wrote this poem called Homo Digitalis, a digital man, overwired to the world, underwired to the heart, evolving and devolving, who lives yinly and yangly, that is, actually and virtually, from restless plugging in to endless plugging up, a curious species, both spacious and specious, man of this progressively expressive, regressive, time-lapsing moment. There is a book that I actually have here that I've been reading, The Art of Looking, How to Live with Presence, Break the Tyranny of Productivity, and Learn to See Our Everyday Wonderland. Alexandra Horowitz wrote it. It's quite marvelous. It's 11 Walks with Expert Eyes, various other characters, and it shows us how different minds expose the many everyday wonderlands hidden right before our eyes. So I just brought one snippet out of this from her speaking about the question of productivity. She says, what's interesting about the productivity dogma is that we live in a culture where we worship work ethic by a very narrow definition as some sort of this grand virtue, and we define it as showing up day after day after day. But I often think that that's the surest way to lull ourselves into a kind of trance of passivity, where we show up, but we're absent from our own lives. And I think one of the most beautiful things you do is you show how we can be present in our own lives through these 11 different people and their perspectives. That was the interviewer talking with her. All right, another poem for us. So we see, I hope we're seeing more of the windows of opportunity and possibility for many things, from wiser living to more loving, better relating, preserving nature and our life-supporting environment, this beautiful earth, when we open wide within and without. When we live, I also call that living more vividly, more lively, more vividly as well. Open your eye, your third eye, the inner all-seeing one, where higher consciousness resides, can preside. That closed, even halfway, can shine no deeper vision or greater wisdom, but wide open, can tune to the higher vibrations of the universe, can gaze mystically within and extra-sensorily, extraordinarily sensitively without. David White and his poet's voice on the opening of Eyes is the title of the poem. That one came right to me as I was putting our show together. And his poem is, that day I saw beneath dark clouds the passing light over the water, and I heard the voice of the world speak out. I knew then, as I had before, life is no passing memory of what has been, nor the remaining pages in a great book waiting to be read. It is the opening of eyes long closed. It is the vision of far-off things seen for the silence they hold. It is the heart, after years of secret conversing, speaking out loud in the clear air. It is Moses in the desert fallen to his knees before the lit bush. It is the man throwing away his shoes as if to enter heaven and finding himself astonished, opened at last, fallen in love with solid ground. Thank you, David White. Well, there were two other artists I wanted us to hear from tonight. One is the contemporary performance artist, Marina Abramovic, and she was saying this: the public is in need of experiences that are not just voyeuristic. Our society is in a mess of losing its spiritual center. Artists should be the oxygen of society. The function of the artist in a disturbed society is to give awareness of the universe, to ask the right questions, to open consciousness, and elevate the mind. How about that? And the poet Denise Levertov, she said, I do not believe that a violent imitation of the horrors of our times is the concern of poetry. Horrors are taken for granted. Disorder is ordinary. People in general take more and more, quote, in their stride. The hides grow thicker. I long for poems of an inner harmony in utter contrast to the chaos in which they exist. Insofar as poetry has a social function, it is to awaken sleepers by means other than shock. I also dialed back, as we're coming now to the final sharings for today, for here and now, was Henry David Thoreau. A man of such wisdom, and he spoke about many things like the spiritual rewards of walking and the creative benefits of keeping a diary and so on. And here he spoke of the gift of the awake imagination. The millions are awake enough for physical labor, but only 1 in a million is awake enough for effective intellectual exertion, only 1 in 100 million to a poetic or divine life. To be awake is to be alive. I have never yet met a man who was quite awake. How could I have looked him in the face? We must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids, but by an infinite expectation of the dawn, which does not forsake us in our soundest sleep. I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his life by conscious endeavor. Thank you, Thoreau. May we ever awaken ours, one and all. So, hope is also obviously a thread and a desire, and to me, there are many reasons, so many reasons for hope, and many examples of it in action right now, on top of all the historical ones, but ones right now and are around us, small and large. And this is Mark Nepo from his book, Drinking from the River of Light. It's a segment called The Energy of Hope. So I'll just read you a little bit of that. I believe that teaching, reading, and writing all have to do with searching. Each involves searching for wholeness through dialogue and experience. When that search involves other living things, we find ourselves in the province of learning and teaching. When that search involves other living things that are not present or of our time, the dialogue takes the form of reading. These forms of search are really inseparable. They constantly impact each other. In truth, a teacher is someone who is actively involved in all 3 forms of search, whether they have a classroom or not, whether they're reading the wind instead of a book, or whether they ever write it down or not. At the heart of it, learning is really seeing, while writing is really internalizing what is seen through the life of our expression. And teaching is asking questions about what is seen and taken to heart, in an effort that, if honestly entered, usually leads to seeing further and taking in more. I try to render both the light and the thing that blocks the light, whatever form it takes. The way an explorer tries to leave an accurate map now, I write in service of the light that seeps through every crack, and in the service of useful maps. I read things mostly in an effort to become whole. And he lists many different poets, from Naomi Shihab Nye to Lao Tzu and Tu Fu. They all have something in common with an eternal principle that informs modern recovery programs, which says that healing takes place in the presence of another. Very often when literature or art does not enable healing, it's because the writer or artist, the steward of the message, is not present. It's a misnomer that hope is idealistic and saccharine. In actuality, hope is the energy of life filtering through the honesty of all its impediments. In our modern era, we endure a culture of hiddenness and denial, which has left most people frantically searching for the true energy of hope. I wanted to bring our man, David Abram, in one more moment because he had, in a different interview, he was talking about our interrelationship with the natural world, a key chord to me. And he says we cannot extend our senses to the whole of humankind without the sensitive and sentient earth getting us there. This vast and sensitive sphere glimmering with sensations that grants us the ability to feel and resonate with one another, to ache when another aches, whether it be a small girl hospitalized in Iran, or a young elephant whose mother was killed by poachers, whether an old man struggling to breathe in China, or an aging sea lion snagged and tangled in a fishing net. Our real collective flesh is not that of humankind as an autonomous abstraction, but is the living body of this biosphere, breathing. That's us. William Faulkner, and we're coming down to the last few pieces now. William Faulkner, in his 1949 acceptance of the Nobel Prize, said, "I believe that man will not merely endure, he will prevail. He is immortal, not because he alone among creatures has an inexhaustible voice, but because he has a soul, a spirit capable of compassion and sacrifice and endurance. The poet's, the writer's duty is to write about these things. It is his privilege to help man endure by lifting his heart, by reminding him of the courage and honor and hope and pride and compassion and pity and sacrifice which have been the glory of his past. The poet's voice need not merely be the record of man. It can be one of the props, the pillars that help him endure and prevail." That was 1949, William Faulkner. Well, Gary Snyder, from his collection This Present Moment, returns as an old poet, and he's been a poet for a very long time, to the eternal question, always worth asking. This poem, short poem, here, in the dark, the new moon long set, a soft grumble in the breeze is the sound of a jet so high it's already long gone by. Some planet rising from the east shines through the trees. It's been years since I thought, why are we here? And the poet Antonio Machado sends us a ray of reassurance in his poem, "Is my soul asleep? Is my soul asleep? Have those beehives that labor at night stopped? And the water wheel of thought, is it dry? The cups empty, wheeling, carrying only shadows? No, my soul is not asleep. It is awake, wide awake. It neither sleeps nor dreams, but watches, its clear eyes open, far off things, and listens at the shores of the great silence." And poets, past and present, like William Butler Yeats, keep us awash in timeless love and beauty, regardless of the roilings of mankind. So why do we not lose sight or sense or experience of these loving and beautiful things in life? The song of Wandering Angus, you probably know this poem, some of you. "I went out to the hazel wood because a fire was in my head, and cut and peeled a hazel wand and hooked a berry to a thread. And when white moths were on the wing and moth-like stars were flickering out, I dropped the berry in a stream and caught a little silver trout. When I had laid it on the floor, I went to blow the fire aflame, but something rustled on the floor, and someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossom in her hair, who called me by my name and ran and faded through the brightening air. Though I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she has gone, and kiss her lips and take her hands, and walk among long dappled grass, and pluck till time and times are done the silver apples of the moon. the golden apples of the sun. So, what can I say as we wind to a close? Open your hearth. Open your hearth, your heart, your earth, your ear of being to everything deeply living, to everything deeply calling. And this poem, continue the revolution, but it's, if you saw it on the paper, it's got an R in parens and then evolution, so it's both revolution and evolution. Continue. And recognition, from homo habilis, able man, to homo erectus, standing man, to homo sapiens, knowing man, to truer, maybe sooner, inner glowing, outer flowing, homo animas, soul man. So maybe we take up the invitation, the encouragements, the choices to see, think, feel, and live as openly and as clearly and as you can, as we can, now and daily. This is a close with this poem of mine, Seeing Clearly. Without blinders or blindfolds, illusion or confusion, looking consciously, wide openly, without looking away, seeing straight to the bottom of the waters, of yourself, of others, of everything before you, all things below, above and around, your mind, your heart, your present moment, your future. And in that clear blue sky seeing, you find that your choosing, your living, your loving becomes so natural. Moving wisely through your days, engaging the world confidently becomes usual. And the beauty, the pure joy of being your own person, a one and only man or woman in the mirror and in the eyes of those you know, comes often and easily, so affirmingly, when you're open, able, committed, no matter what or where it leads, to see everything clearly. Thank you again for listening in, so generously listening in, for thinking and feeling in and awakening in. Special thanks, as always, to all of you donating to support these weekly programs and my poetic arts. Every contribution helps them to grow and thrive. They can be made in any amount by PayPal or Venmo or directly through my site. Likewise, patrons bringing me into their worlds as an artist in residence for a month or season ahead this year are also welcome. Last, I'm gathering your good questions. I have quite a handful and maybe some more you will send me to answer in a soon upcoming program. So send yours along to me by email to colin@thepoetorialist.com. You can hear or share replays of any program on my YouTube channel and soon ahead on other platforms for listening. I invite you to lean in next week or soon again. Until then, dear listeners, here's to good days ahead, days of wider open eyes, minds, and hearts, and good spirits.